Hey there, how's it going? I'm Gemma Hickey, the author of Almost Feral, coming to you from my home. Hope you're all staying in and staying safe. My publisher at Breakwater Books asked me to do a reading for my recently published memoir, Almost Feral, to help you folks pass the time. And I just want to say that this book is a book about survival, not just about individual survival, but about collective survival. It's about Newfoundland and Labrador. And when I walked across the island a few years ago, I had the opportunity to reflect on how growing up on an island shaped my identity. It was really challenging to spend so much time by myself as I walked the shoulder of the Trans-Canada Highway. Solitude doesn't come naturally to me, given my personality, but it was an opportunity to reflect on my life, my trauma, people who influenced me in the best kind of way. And so I hope that this time of isolation, even though it is challenging, gives you the same gifts. Because when we're forced to spend time alone with ourselves, so many things come to the surface. Those things can help us find our way through this challenging time. So hold on. We'll get through it. And today I'm going to be reading from the chapter called Tapestries and honoring my maternal grandmother, Mary Duffy Hayward. So I hope you enjoy it. And I also want to mention that breakwaterbooks.com has books for sale online, and there's so many great titles to choose from. So I hope that you'll support a local business, a great publisher, and also artists who are so talented from this province. I'm so very proud to be among them. The rocking chair creaks like an old mattress as my grandmother takes her place. It's far from a throne, but on my mom's side of the family, Nan was revered like a queen. The needles are standing at attention on top of a mountain of wool in a woven basket next to my chair. Hand me them, she orders and points. What are you knitting now, Nan? I asked. A blanket for your cousin Colleen. Will it be pink? It's a quilt, she replied. It'll be as many colors as I have grandchildren. Just imagine how dull life would be if all my youngsters were the same. I want blue, I announced. But what if Michael wants blue too? There are different shades of every color, she responded. Room for everyone. I've been wrapping myself up in her words ever since. We are like quilts. What we know, what we learn, and what we do are woven together to make us who we are. Every day we weave in and out of one another's lives through our interactions, and that becomes a part of who we are too. None of us are the same, and indeed there is room for us all, regardless of differences. There are many colors of the same shades of human. Even if blood doesn't bind us, our humanity should. On the morning of April 20th, 1919, my maternal grandmother was born. The bells of the Basilica of St. John the Baptist were ringing that day because it was Easter Sunday. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her father, John Duffy, was born in 1988. John was an artist, and the walls, ceilings, and entrances of the church buildings were his canvas. He also painted signs for local merchants and the coat of arms at the old city hall. He married Isabel Doyle, and they lived at the top of Longs Hill in St. John's. Their children, my grandmother and her older sister, attended the Our Lady of Mercy School on Military Road, run by the Sisters of Mercy. The church owned the house my great-grandparents lived in, and in addition to the money he made from his paintings, he and his family were allowed to live there, as long as he worked for the church. His daughters were also granted an education, as if they had come from money, the Sisters of Mercy. When the Great Fire of 1892 devastated the city of St. John's, My great-grandmother had to live in a tent in Bannerman Park, along with many other people whose homes were lost in the fire. In those days, they would go down to the waterfront to see the bodies of men that died during the seal hunt and offer their condolences. My great-grandmother set up a tea room for additional income, serving coffee, tea, and desserts. But when her husband died in 1931, the family had to move out of the house provided by the church. My great-grandmother quickly found an apartment on Duckworth Street, across from where the Modern Shoe Hospital is now located, and set up another tea room. She refused the dole during the Great Depression, out of pride, and took in boarders, knit blankets, sweaters, mittens, and socks. She provided hot meals for soldiers when prosperity returned to the island during the Second World War. Everyone had a job to do, peeling vegetables, cleaning, serving, and so on. She eventually remarried a tailor from Stephenville. Her daughter, my grandmother, worked at Bon Marché, a mail-order store primarily for fishermen who lived in the outport communities along the island's coast, or, as Newfoundlanders say, around the bay. She met my grandfather at a dance in Bannerman Park. Jim was always dressed up, she said. He didn't want people to treat him differently if they found out he was poor. My grandmother told me she wasn't allowed to go to the part of town where my grandfather was from. He had some tricks, she added. He'd make 2 coats out of one by turning it inside out. Did he have some tricks when he courted you, Nan, I asked. Back then you didn't marry for love, she replied. That comes later if you're lucky. They were married at the Marian Chapel, located inside the Basilica, and her cousin from Petty Harbour drove them by car to the reception. After their marriage, they lived in the Battery, the community of houses famously nestled into the steep slope of Single Hill, which overlooks St. John's Harbour. And even though there were only 2 bedrooms, they had relatives stay with them during the winter who paid board. The additional income, on top of my grandfather's job at the bakery, helped them raise their growing family, 9 children in all. And my grandmother, with her generous and sometimes mischievous sense of humor, had a story for each child. Paula was the cobalt baby. When I asked my grandmother what that meant, she said, Jim came home from the hospital after being treated with cobalt for his throat cancer, so I took pity on him, and Paula was born. Debbie was the brush baby. When I asked my grandmother what that meant, she said, I was brushing my hair in the bed and dropped the brush in the blankets. And when I came back up again, Jim had me pregnant on Debbie. Margie was the mission baby. When I asked my grandmother what that meant, she said, during Lent, a missionary priest would come to the church for a week and preach Christian living. So Jim went all missionary on me. The oldest child, Elizabeth, was born in 1941, when the war was still on. She died in Montreal in 1955 after an operation to have a tumor removed from her brain. My grandmother was bedridden due to another baby, so the parish priest, who was traveling to Montreal on church business, assured my grandmother that he would visit Elizabeth. That parish priest eventually became Archbishop. His name was Alphonsus Penny, who later resigned his position after a commission of inquiry which he appointed concluded that he was likely aware that children and young adults had been sexually abused by priests. Elizabeth's body was shipped back to St. John's by train and waked in the dining room. As I walked alone along the Trans-Canada Highway, I started reflecting on my physical location against the backdrop of the culture I grew up in. It has been woven into the tapestry of my identity from 3 different yet equally entwined threads: growing up in St. John's, being raised Roman Catholic, and coming out. When I was young, I had no exposure to people who were different. I grew up with a sense of superiority because I was raised Roman Catholic and taught that Catholics were better than Protestants. I was even told that there's a difference between townies, the residents of St. John's, and baymen, the people who live and work in the rural fishing outports along the coast of the island. So many binaries. My grandparents managed to see beyond the class divide that existed between them. But how often do the conflicts of our lives boil down to the oversimplified equation of us versus them? We're all different, it's true. And we should respect those differences and do what we can to recognize and address the suffering and humiliation imposed on others in the name of difference. The tapestry, that which binds us together and allows our differences, is complicated. If you're a townie reading this, I am one of us. But if you're part of that larger designation, a Newfoundlander reading this, I am one of us too. If you're Canadian, I'm one of us. If you were raised in the Christian faith, I'm one of us. If you're a white person who has enjoyed the benefits of white privilege in our colonial past, I am one of us. If you've suffered at the hands of bigotry, I am one of us. If you've ever felt pain, then like you, I am one of us. Hang in there, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'll be coming back to you soon.